Today, co-innovation is something we all acknowledge as being of public interest. At Movin'On, we began acting as a co-innovation ecosystem several years ago to make mobility safer, more sustainable, more inclusive, and more efficient. Movin'On was established out of a conviction: no single actor will be able to respond to today's challenges alone. The private sector, because it is in direct contact with the aspirations of its customers and of society, constitutes an indispensable link between political decisions and the demands of the general public. It has the means to unite efforts to effectively and lastingly change things. We began our efforts by bringing together companies. You may not know the Movin'On brand yet, but you definitely know companies that are part of our ecosystem, that has banded together to move toward a sustainable mobility. The Movin'On communities bring together various sectors and expertise. Transport, of course, but also technology, energy, information and communication, finance and insurance, town planning, architecture, artificial intelligence, strategy, logistics, ethics, and so on. However, it takes an ecosystem to innovate and to move from ambition to action. The private sector alone was not enough. Now, Movin'On brings together the 4 C's: countries, cities, civil society, companies. I will now leave the stage to 3 CEOs that are part of our ecosystem, and also to the United Nations Climate Ambassador.
The future of the planet is at stake today. We already were convinced of this, and what we experience together increases the sense of urgency. Therefore, we must go even further to make people and goods mobility safer, more accessible, and efficient. We must be the generation that will pass on a more sustainable Earth to future generations. We must move forward and faster towards sustainable mobility.
Beyond the economy, the entire wealth creation for nations is at stake. Their ability to innovate, to develop, to invest, and maintain a social system that protects us all and gives us the ability to build a future for everyone.
The transport sector, which accounts for 28% of global energy-related emissions and employs close to 300 million persons, has an especially important role to play. It's about bringing real economy actors, civil society, and governments together to address a sector that, if we fail in our effort to make this sector a sustainable sector, we will not achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement.
Innovation and challenges are becoming global. Alone, we are nothing. Nations, regions, cities, companies, big, small, or emerging, NGOs, and of course, all of us, people living on Earth. We all have the duty and power to invent the world of tomorrow. We all have an essential role to play together with Movin'On.
And I think it is critical that as companies, we harness that power, that agility that we all demonstrated in responding to the crisis, because innovation really cannot be done alone.
Today's fast-moving environment, and in particular in times of economic crisis, such collaboration is absolutely fundamental. We should move towards a new resilient economic paradigm, a more balanced one, not only focused on short-term financial performance, which are needed, but not only, with a model which also considers sustainability.
Today, we all have to change ourselves and to change everything.
Together, we are not only stronger, but also smarter. Collective action is the only way to foster change and have a real positive impact on people's life. And I do know that together, with your help, we will take Movin'On ecosystem to the next level.
With the unprecedented crisis we are experiencing now, the co-innovation model is more relevant than ever, and mobility has a major role to play. The Race to Zero pledge launched by the United Nations or climate actions announced by his Secretary General are additional concrete examples that show that you can't stand alone if you really, truly want to change things. Since the COVID crisis, the UN Secretary General has called on political leaders, private sector, civil society to ensure that the recovery builds sustainable, resilient, and inclusive economies and societies. Mobility is definitely part of this green recovery. With the current crisis, mobility has been disrupted and is at the heart of many debates. But I firmly believe that this crisis will help us move faster toward a more sustainable and inclusive mobility. At Movin'On, we are all convinced that the world of tomorrow will not be a world with less mobility, but a world with safer, more accessible, and more sustainable mobility. In fact, more mobility with less impact. Our work is to provide concrete solutions and innovations for everyone's mobility needs, with the aim of contributing to the progress of society while acting for the planet. Concretely, how does Movin'On act to move toward a sustainable mobility? Movin'On is an action-driven organization. We provide concrete solutions and innovation through innovative ways of working. Working groups, expert marketplace, communities of interest, innovation laboratory. These are all based on the same foundation, the pooling of very diverse expertise. Let's take an example with our communities of interest. They are working groups that bring together several ecosystem stakeholders. They investigate a common chosen topic, develop a common vision, and experiment new mobility solutions together. One of our communities of interest is working on to make zero-emission freight vehicles becoming the norm. The Transport Decarbonization Alliance, EV100, the Climate Group, Cold Start are leading this group, and around the table there are much more actors. As we are here on the North American East Coast, we'll share now a focus on one of our communities of interest led by 3 cities from the US, Canada, and France: Boston, Montreal, and Lyon.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Antoine Sautenay, and I'm working for the Public Affairs Department as a mission group. As underlined by Nicolas Beaumont, I am very pleased to introduce this Movin'On community of interest on data and mobility with the 3 cities of Boston, Lyon, and Montreal. Maybe to better understand why we decided to work as an ecosystem on this specific topic of data and mobility. As you may know, cities today are facing common challenges due to new urban mobilities and driven by data. Actually, a growing number of private options are emerging: car sharing, electric scooters, and these options are disrupting both data management and mobility planning. Then the key question for cities is to determine what will be the impact of these new urban mobilities on public policies. And this is the reason why, due to this very complex issue, we decided to support cities, Movin'On, to adapt to societal changes and to business needs. Now, what are we trying to achieve as an ecosystem, as Movin'On, with these 3 cities and this community of interest? Leaning on the Movin'On ecosystem, the 3 cities, Boston, Lyon, and Montreal, decided to set up a manifesto and a roadmap on data and mobility with some key principles of actions to enrich and to test on the ground, depending on the experiences of each city. We decided to start this process and this project of community of interest in January 2020, and the end of this community of interest will be at the Movin'On Summit in June 2021. We all together, with all the key stakeholders, decided to work as an ecosystem on 4 topics: access to data and governance, ethics and mobility data, private data, and data standardization. We already achieved the first step on access to data and governance through a collaborative workshop gathering all the ecosystem, including, of course, private companies. Today we are currently working on the second chapter on ethics and mobility data. Now, and this is a key learning, why we decided to work as an ecosystem on this topic and with this community of interest. You understood, Movin'On is a business-oriented ecosystem. Data mobility is a very complex issue. This is the reason why we decided at the beginning to involve key companies on data and mobility: Uber, Blue System, Dot, Microsoft, in order to be able to work all together, companies with cities, with civil society, with academics, to collect their insights through a collaborative online platform, and at the end, to produce action, to produce concrete results, actually those principles of actions. Now we are working on the second step on ethics and mobility data. We will involve more and more companies, and ultimately the goal will be to give an overall overview of this community of interest with all the businesses involved at the Movin'On Summit in June 2021, and the idea is to remain open and to inspire mobility key stakeholders, cities, civil society, and of course, companies. We will be glad if you can join our forces at the Movin'On Summit in 2021. Thank you so much.